Welcome to The Explainer. All right, let's just dive right in, shall we? Today, we are taking a super vibrant, honestly, kind of chaotic, and absolutely fascinating journey through the evolution of New York City's nightlife in the 1970s and 80s. We're going to look at how a deeply marginalized underground movement completely transformed into this global cultural juggernaut before ultimately fracturing into the creative scenes that literally still define how we party today.
And, to really grasp why this explosion happened in the first place, this quote just hits the nail on the head. As Michael Jackson so simply put it, the essence of the era's dance floor was escapism. You really got to remember the context of America in the 1970s here. The public was just exhausted. I mean, they were dealing with the messy aftermath of the Vietnam War, the Watergate scandal, the ongoing battle for civil rights, and some really severe economic anxieties like sky-high inflation. So out of all this post-upheaval uncertainty, the discotheque emerged as the ultimate release valve. It was a space that offered pure, unadulterated escape from those daily social anxieties. It gave young people a chance to just forget the rest of the world and completely lose themselves in the rhythm. So to wrap our heads around how incredibly fast this all went down, let's just take a quick look at this timeline. We're talking about a single decade where the entire architecture of modern nightlife was built, peaked, crashed, and was reborn. We start off in 1970 with the opening of an underground sanctuary called The Loft. Fast forward to 1977, and the scene just explodes into the mainstream with the legendary Studio 54. Right around the exact same time, a massive citywide blackout sparks a completely different musical revolution. By 1979, the bubble bursts, both legally and culturally, leading us right into 1980 with a gritty post-disco rebirth at a club called Danceteria.
All right, Section 1, Roots of the Dance Floor.
Now, before the velvet ropes and all that crazy celebrity spectacle, we really have to look at the foundation. And that foundation was built in 1970 by a guy named David Mansuko. Mansuko was essentially this psychedelic crusader on a mission to turn people on to a totally new kind of communal experience. He started hosting these parties in his own space at 647 Broadway, famously calling the very first one Love Saves the Day. Now, because Mansuko didn't sell food or alcohol, he totally circumvented New York's strict licensing laws, operating in this clever legal gray area. It was strictly invite only, and that meant you were there for the community, not because of the amount of money in your pocket. In a pre-Stonewall era, where, engaging in gay behavior in public was heavily policed, the Loft became an absolutely vital, underground safe haven for the LGBTQ+ community. It was this rare place where marginalized people could safely congregate, express themselves freely, and just experience music in a way that had literally never been done before. And Mansuko was absolutely obsessed, literally obsessed, with the visceral, physical experience of a party. Legendary DJ Frankie Knuckles actually recalls how Mansuko would create these complete sensory environments. He'd plunge the room into total darkness, play the sound effects of a thunderstorm, and then eventually turn on these massive fans so the crowd literally felt the wind on their skin. Can you imagine? He and sound specialist Alex Rosner really pioneered modern club audio. They added subwoofers for unprecedented bass and hung 4 tweeters directly over the dancers, like this crazy alien chandelier. It created a completely immersive, pure sonic landscape, where the music felt like it was emanating directly from the center of the room.
Okay, moving on to Section 2, the rise of Studio 54.
Let's fast forward a bit to 1977 and see how this all builds into something completely different. Enter Steve Rubell and Ian Schrager, 2 college friends from Brooklyn who decided to take this booming disco trend and just inject it with unprecedented scale and glamour by transforming an old Broadway opera house into a nightclub. Understanding how drastically the philosophy shifted here is absolutely crucial. See, where Mansuko's Loft was egalitarian, hidden, and purely about the music and protecting its community, Studio 54 was the exact opposite. Rubell and Schrager built a hyper-exclusive, VIP-obsessed enterprise fueled by sheer theatrical hedonism. They essentially took the raw, authentic energy of the underground and monetized it into a massive, celebrity-driven spectacle, capitalizing heavily on the era's new sexual and social freedoms.
And let me tell you, this strategy worked immediately. Just look at the absolute unbridled mayhem of their opening night on April 26, 1977. Thousands of people packed West 54th Street, completely blocking the entrance. It was so chaotic that Frank Sinatra was famously trapped inside his limousine, completely unable to even get to the front door. The party was literally spilling out into the street before anyone even got inside. It was a massive signal to the world that something historic was happening. But here's what actually made Studio 54 so utterly unique. It acted as this wild collision point for high art, theater, and nightlife all at once.
Ian Schrager specifically exploited the building's old opera house layout. He envisioned the former stage as the actual dance floor, so the guests were essentially the performers. They were there to see and be seen. It really functioned as an extension of New York's avant-garde art scene. Just as Andy Warhol's iconic soup cans were challenging what belonged in a fine art museum, Studio 54 was actively challenging what a party could even be. The whole environment was meticulously designed to absorb and completely transform the audience.
Section 3. Beyond the velvet rope. So to maintain that insane electric energy inside, they had to be absolutely ruthless on the outside. And this brings us to the carefully curated culture of excess and the incredibly strict social hierarchy that governed Studio 54. Steve Rubell became the undisputed master of the door. He acted almost like a casting director for the night's performance. His core philosophy? Well, he said the perfect party is like a tossed salad. The mixture itself is way more important than the individual ingredients. He would deliberately curate the crowd, intentionally mixing high society socialites, avant-garde drag queens, everyday club kids, and sometimes even the limousine drivers of his famous guests. The goal was to create this totally unpredictable atmosphere where rigid social barriers between rich and poor or straight and gay just completely evaporated under the flashing lights. But if you didn't fit the exact vibe Rubell was looking for, yeah, you were completely out of luck. He notoriously and kind of cruelly dismissed the crowds he wouldn't let in as the gray people. Basically, folks he deemed just not glamorous or interesting enough for his salad. People went to astonishing and honestly sometimes dangerous lengths just to bypass his rejections. In one famous instance, 2 women actually tried to ride a horse to the front door just to stand out. And get this, Rubell let the horse in, but made the women stay outside. In another crazy case, he told a woman to strip down in the dead of winter to prove how badly she wanted to get in. She actually did it, and unfortunately ended up hospitalized with frostbite. Wild, right? Section 4. The fall of disco. Now, a culture built on this level of extreme hubris and excess, it can really only burn so bright for so long. As disco exploded into massive mainstream success, it simultaneously sowed the seeds for its own dual cultural and legal collapse. Let's look at the legal collapse first. This staggering number, $47,000, is the ultimate punchline to Studio 54's downfall. In this incredibly arrogant magazine interview, Steve Rubell was bragging that Studio 54 was making over $1 million in pure profit, famously claiming that only the mafia does better. Well, the problem with saying that out loud, they had officially reported a net income of only $47,000 to the IRS. So naturally, the federal government took a very keen interest in that massive discrepancy. And boy, did that hubris lead straight to a massive bust. In late 1978, 50 IRS agents raided Studio 54. They found financial ledgers, literally boldly labeled skim, $1 million in cash just hidden up in the ceiling, and hundreds of quaaludes. Schrager and Rubell were headed straight for prison. But concurrently, a violent cultural backlash was brewing against disco's mainstream saturation. In July 1979, at a Chicago baseball stadium, a local radio DJ orchestrated Disco Demolition Night. Over 70,000 people showed up just to literally blow up 20,000 disco records right there on the field. What had started out as a liberating, safe tool for inner-city queer communities had been commodified, completely misunderstood by the masses, and then violently rejected.
Section 5. Danceteria and the Aftermath.
But you know, here's the real beauty of New York City nightlife. The death of disco didn't actually kill the party. It just fractured it, driving it right back underground into this incredibly creative, gritty, post-disco landscape. By 1980, the scene found a new home at a club called Danceteria. Founded by Rudolph Piper and Jim Forat, it was perfectly described as the place where the glamour of Studio 54 met the punk rock grime of CBGB. Danceteria offered a totally novel sensory overload, spread across 3 floors. You had experimental DJs down in the basement, live bands on the first floor, and this groundbreaking video lounge up on the second. It was highly inventive and just deeply irreverent. And this was the exact fertile ground where rising stars like Madonna, who actually famously worked the coat check and performed some of her earliest gigs there, got their start.
Oh, and Danceteria's legacy left us with this absolutely bizarre, almost unbelievable historical footnote. The promoters there loved throwing these heavily themed parties. For one specific event in 1985, they actually bought a fake, hollowed-out World War II practice bomb to use as a time capsule. Clubgoers filled it up with photos and notes, and they buried it in an alley out back, supposedly meant to be opened in 10,000 years. Well, in 2017, construction workers dug it up. Totally believing it was a real unexploded piece of military ordnance, the NYPD bomb squad had to evacuate an entire block in Manhattan. Turns out it was just the waterlogged, ruined memories of an 80s danceteria party. No way, right? Now, while all this disco madness was dominating the late 70s clubs, a completely parallel musical revolution was quietly brewing out on the streets, largely catalyzed by the infamous July 1977 NYC blackout. Lightning strikes completely cut power to the entire city. Up in the Bronx, DJs like Grandmaster Caz were literally in the middle of a park battle when the lights just died. During the ensuing blackout, widespread looting occurred all over the city. But interestingly, aspiring musicians used this temporary chaos to acquire high-end turntables and mixers that they could never otherwise afford. According to early pioneers, this sudden, massive influx of DJ equipment directly catalyzed the growing, unnamed movement that would very soon become known globally as hip-hop.
So as we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with something to really chew on. Look at the modern landscape of music festivals, VIP bottle service, and underground warehouse raves. From David Mancuso's pure pursuit of the egalitarian sonic experience, all the way to Steve Rubell's invention of the exclusive celebrity-driven velvet rope, how much of that 1970s DNA still dictates exactly how we own the dance today? Next time you step into a venue, just take a look around at the speakers, the crowd, and the door. You'll see the echoes of the Loft, Studio 54, and Danceteria absolutely everywhere. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you on the next explainer.